After the Battle of Antietam and after some of the battles that took place in the East, Lincoln does something very influential. He issues the Emancipation Proclamation. Hopefully you guys all know what the Emancipation Proclamation is, but it was signed in 1863. What it did is it basically set out an ultimatum saying if all of the southern states if this war is not over, if they have not come back to the Union by January 1st, 1863, then all of the slaves in the southern territories will be free. So the Emancipation Proclamation basically frees all of the slaves that are living in Confederate territories. It talks about in the Emancipation Proclamation, it's really important to know that excuse me, Lincoln really just wanted to save the Union. And he even says, if I could save it by not freeing the slaves, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. So Lincoln really didn't have a huge emphasis on trying to get rid of slavery, but he realized at this time it's what he had to do. The war in the East starts to wrap up, and this very famous battle takes place that hopefully you guys all know about. The South has had lots of big victories. Lee's very confident. So he decides that he's going to go into Union territory and he is going to invade the North and win on their home turf. So he marches Confederate troops into Pennsylvania and they have the battle of Gettysburg. Going into this battle, the Confederates were extremely outnumbered, 75,000 to 90,000. The Confederate troops are eventually forced to retreat, and they suffer a pretty devastating loss. It's a turning point of the war. Gettysburg is known as the turning point of the war because after Gettysburg, the South really was never able to regain their strength and regain their spirit to go into Northern territory and try and defeat the North in their own turf. That was really their goal, was to go in and defeat the North on their home turf and really set and make a presence in the North. They were never able to do that, even after trying several times. So after Gettysburg, Lee never attempted to invade into the North. After the Battle of Gettysburg, Lincoln makes one of his most famous speeches that he makes, which is the Gettysburg Address. It's the one that begins 7 years ago. If you would, click on this link, or you can copy and paste it into a browser, but if you would click on this link, it takes you to this website right here. And if you would, take the time to read the Gettysburg Address and to have someone listen or someone speak it. You can click on any of these people and they will recite the Gettysburg Address for you. It's a really powerful address, and it talks about just the importance of democracy and the importance of our nation and all of the things that our forefathers did. And he really stresses the importance of being a democracy and fighting for that liberty and preserving those goals that the forefathers set out. Okay, we're going to turn our attention now to the war in the West. Like I told you guys, the Western commander for the Union Army was Ulysses S. Grant. And the Northern objective was to control the Mississippi River and to split the Confederacy into two. And the importance of controlling the Mississippi River was to control supply lines. If they could control the Mississippi, then they could cut supplies off to the Southern armies and eventually win the war in that way. So Ulysses S. Grant was extremely successful in being able to do that. He starts out by capturing Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, which are two extremely important forts along the Tennessee and Cumberland River. 2 weeks later, the Southern troops are able to capture New Orleans. So now they have Now they have New Orleans, which is at the bottom of the Mississippi River. After the Battle of Shiloh, after a long battle of some setbacks, but they are eventually able to be victorious, Grant is able to capture Memphis on the Mississippi River. So the last city that is needed in order to complete control over the Mississippi River was the city of Vicksburg, Mississippi. Grant, after he's able to capture Memphis and New Orleans, Grant is he's able to capture Vicksburg, Mississippi. And with this capture at the Battle of Vicksburg, where Grant lays siege on Vicksburg, Mississippi, he's able to take control of Vicksburg, and he's able to successfully control the entire Mississippi River. The Battle of Vicksburg is probably one of the most important battles of the Civil War because it really seals the deal up for the South. Now that they have captured Vicksburg, they now control the entire Mississippi River, and they have successfully split the Confederacy. And they now control the main source of supply lines getting to the internal part of the South. So this was a huge success for the North. The later years of the war, Grant is named the commander of all the Union armies. So instead of just being in charge of the West, he's in charge of all the Union armies. And he develops a plan to defeat Confederate troops. His idea is he's going to take Virginia, and Sherman's going to march through the Deep South and the Atlantic coast, taking over those southern towns. And that's exactly what General Sherman does. General William Tecumseh Sherman, he marches through Atlanta and basically destroys everything in his path. He destroys crops, he loots towns, he destroys factories, he destroys many things. He burns down farms, sets fires to fields, and this is known as Sherman's March to Sea. He basically goes in and just completely destroys the city of Atlanta. After he does that, he marches into South Carolina and North Carolina, and as he's going, he's just destroying everything in his path. So this is William Tecumseh Sherman's total war of him just going in and destroying everything. The final event of the Civil War was in Virginia after Tecumseh Sherman goes through and the Carolinas and Georgia and completely destroys everything in his path. In Virginia, Ulysses S. Grant is laying siege on the Confederate troops. He's closing in further and further, and Lee is he's forced to evacuate troops in Petersburg, and he's eventually forced to evacuate troops in Richmond. As Lee begins to move west, Grant starts to follow him, and he starts to realize that he needs to surrender. So Lee sends a message to Grant that he's ready to surrender, and they meet in a farmhouse in Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, which is a town in Virginia. And Lee surrenders his army, and then following all of the other southern states surrender, and the Civil War comes to a close in 1865. And here's a little painting I found of Lee and Grant signing the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, the final event in the Civil War. Okay, so I know that was a lot to swallow. I know that was a lot of information. We're going to do an activity in class where you guys are going to look at a map and follow through the events of the Civil War. So if there's anything you didn't understand, anything you didn't quite follow, please let me know. I know that the Civil War can be kind of confusing. It's all those different battles. After the Civil War, as you know, a few days actually after the close of the Civil War, President Lincoln was assassinated, and we get into what is known as the phase of Reconstruction, which we will continue talking about in class on Wednesday and Thursday. So if you guys, I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you guys on Monday.